It's My Nerd World, a Star Wars show. And on this week's episode, we have your emails, listener feedback. We'll get into that based off of last week's episode. And we received some details about the Skeleton Crew and a release date. So I'll share that with you on this week's episode. As always, you can email TalkShowNerd@gmail.com.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
And welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice, a Star Wars show. Thank you so much for checking out this episode. As I mentioned, if you want to email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. And we have email that we'll get to coming up. Let's not waste any time, though. Let's dive into the news of this week.
This is not going to go the way you think.
So it appears People magazine has now picked up the Depeche Mode news dropping mantle from what used to be exclusive to Entertainment Weekly. Brand new article released this week. Jude Law teases childhood adventure and Star Wars Easter eggs in Skeleton Crew series First Look. Star Wars Skeleton Crew will premiere December 3rd on Disney+. In People's exclusive First Look at the latest edition of the iconic franchise, Jude Law, 51, takes on the role of Jod Nawood in Disney's new coming-of-age series, when four kids make a mysterious discovery. On their seemingly safe home planet, they get lost in a strange and dangerous galaxy, according to the official synopsis. Finding their way home, meeting unlikely allies and enemies will be a greater adventure than they ever imagined. So my understanding on this is this takes place in the Mandoverse timeline. I'm not 100% sure how close it is to Ahsoka. There has been quite a bit of speculation that perhaps there will be some overlaps here relating to where they end up and perhaps it being the same location or at least that same part of a different galaxy of where Sabine and Ahsoka ended up at the end of the Ahsoka series. Also, the pirate, and so I believe this actually takes place pre season 3 of The Mandalorian, because the pirate, the main pirate that we see in season 3, and forgive me, I don't remember his name, does appear as one of the villains in this series. When asked about what Star Wars fans can expect with the latest addition to its cinematic universe, Jude Law tells People that the first word that comes to mind when describing the series is joyful. He also explains that viewers will watch the kids maneuver through places where they shouldn't be, and adds that seeing children in that environment in a Star Wars environment is thrilling and very, very unique. It's a fun place to be, the universe of Star Wars, he adds with a smile. And there are great references to old films and recent episodes and series. There's a lot of originality, and I hope that it will bring a feeling of fun to those who watch it. So there's been some chatter around this show in the wake of the release and controversies surrounding The Acolyte. Unfortunately, most of the comments have been negative, of people saying that this show is in trouble as well. I don't know how anybody would really know or could be able to make that assessment, even if they received information from individuals that might be privy to have seen some of the episodes. It still is very subjective. It just feels like the go-to thing now to rip on Star Wars, so I'm not putting a lot of stock in that. Now, that being said, the reason why I brought that up was because I really appreciated those comments from Jude Law about bringing back the fun of Star Wars and the adventure of Star Wars. That was missing somewhat in Acolyte. Be that as it may, it wasn't necessarily needed for Acolyte or appropriate. But Star Wars is fun. I remember that reporter, and you have to forgive me, his name escapes me, famous reporter. He's interviewed at the very beginning of the Empire of Dreams documentary on Disney Plus, and also in the original DVD release of the saga. But he talked about just how much fun it was to just watch Star Wars. And that first film, even all these years later, is still a lot of fun to watch. It's not slow by any stretch. It moves at a fast clip, especially given the length of films these days running, 2 hour 15, 2 hour 20 run times, and you get Star Wars in it, at a nice good 2 hours. The editing of A New Hope, because of George Lucas having to bring in other editors and having to make such quick cuts and speed up the pacing, it really lends itself to a still, to this day, a fun and far be it from boring watch for a movie that came out in 1977. With that, I'm excited to hear those types of comments. I'll, of course, reserve judgment completely until I see the Skeleton Crew just like you. Law tells people that with the Skeleton Crew, he and his younger cast members are all in a state of confusion and jeopardy and challenge. He adds that the series is very much a piece about working together and overcoming fears and overcoming perhaps one's opinion of oneself or one's own weaknesses in order to succeed. And this is pretty typical. The show's not coming out until December 3rd. I imagine with the photos that came along with this and the article, these are usually precursors to getting a trailer, which I would think we would now get within a month's time, if not sooner. But these comments are all very typical for what you get in the pre-promotion without giving away too much. He went on to say, I had a wonderful time making this with everyone involved. Those four, the child actors in particular, who worked with me very closely, were just great fun and incredibly professional. I'm immensely proud to be part of their crew. Now, the series creators, John Watts and Christopher Ford, shared the same sentiments and open up about the tight-knit bond that Law formed with the kids on the set. Because he's with the kids all the time, he's also kind of felt like a co-director, co-producer with us, and he's a co-acting coach, giving the kids tips, and they would look to him. He really became a sort of mentor figure to the kids as well, Watts recalls, as Ford adds, and he didn't have to do that. He just did that because he was nice, and it would make things work great. Watts reveals that the series will introduce a new droid named SM-33. He spoke exclusively to people, and it will be who he exclusively tells people will be voiced by Nick Frost. He's like a rusty old cranky droid that sort of reluctantly helps the kids along the way. Noting how fun and absolutely perfect Frost's contributions are, he adds the other thing about him is that he's the first mate of this mysterious ship. Not only are the inclusion of the droids in any Star Wars project crucial, Law says that the versatile robots are an inspiration to work with. Of course, you're expecting to work with droids and alien species, but you forget that they're brought to life in front of you by these extraordinary people who have skills, whether it's puppets or animatronic experts, he explains. You're surrounded by them because they are as much a part of the cast as those who are flesh and blood. Watts and Ford also say that the hover bikes was integral to telling the story of a childhood adventure, not only for the audience tuning in, but also for the child actors involved. They had like little bikes and they were on rails, and so they'd like slide back and forth and left and right so they could turn in banks, while Watts explains, while Ford recalls seeing guys in full green suits helping in the background. And included with this People article was a photograph of a couple of the children on what essentially was a speeder, a smaller speeder. And it really feels like, just based off of what I've read and what I saw the photos, that it kind of takes on that, and they've mentioned this, that emblem feel from the 80s where these speeders are sort of acting as a proxy for what we would have seen in our 80s films of kids on BMX bikes. In reality, it looks completely insane, and for the kids, the main direction was stop smiling because they were having so much fun. Among the many things audiences will have to look forward to in the new series, Law tells people that his character, Jod, is someone who uses quick thinking, charm, and conversation to get out of all sorts of scenarios. He adds that eagle-eyed Star Wars fans will be able to spot details that pay homage to the original films. If you look carefully, we've got some Star Wars tech that dates right back, I believe, to the original film, he reveals. They do Easter eggs well. So that's one of the joys, I think, of this universe. For those who know, there are these little details always hidden away, or Easter eggs that people can find and link up. Watts confirms Law's sentiments and teases there's a lot of Easter eggs to be found. In fact, Ford says that he and Watts had fun, and it was a challenge of finding some deep-cut references. I can't wait, Watts gushes. I mean, even in the first episode, there's a couple really, really great references that certain fans will immediately recognize. Despite this, the duo assures viewers that they don't need to be well-versed in the intergalactic franchise to appreciate the magic. You don't have to know everything about Star Wars to enjoy the show, Watts shares. You can come into it completely fresh and enjoy the story. But if you do happen to be a Star Wars super fan, there's a lot for you. Never miss a story. Oh, and then they get into... it's a People magazine plug. I was reading this dry for the first time. I didn't pre-read it. I like to, on occasion, do that when I do the show. It kind of adds a little bit more of an instinctive reaction from me, your host, when I go and do that. Again, Star Wars Skeleton Crew premieres December 3rd on Disney+. There's been some leaking of promotional items showing you pictures of the kids. The Lego ship. And I can't... It's the... Onyx Cinder, I think it's what it's called. It looks, based off the Lego, similar to the Knights of Ren ship. It's black. It just kind of has a bit of that shape to it. Not a one-to-one by any stretch at all. This is going to be an interesting show for a number of different reasons. One, it's going to be probably one of the last original Star Wars series that we end up getting. Based off of the comments from Bob Iger, currently back as CEO of Disney, having left and then come back, taking over for Bob Chapek. He has mentioned many times about pulling back on the streaming content and doing quality over quantity. And I think the fact that The Acolyte was already pretty much in the can by the time this happened, and Skeleton Crew has been done, I think, for a long time as well, that if it hadn't been for that, those shows may have been canceled before they even got started. So Skeleton Crew, I think, is going to be the last of what we'll see, apart from additional seasons from previous shows that have already been dropped. I know that there's been no confirmation of an Acolyte Season 2 yet. I think that's 50-50 at this point in time at best, based off the controversy around it, not knowing genuinely how it did on the streaming platform. There was a smattering of talk of a Book of Boba Fett Season 2, but I don't think that's come to fruition. Of course, Mandalorian and Grogu is the first film that we'll be getting since The Rise of Skywalker, which still is just blows my mind. And then there is an expectation of an Ahsoka Season 2. So I'm looking forward to the show. I've been looking forward to the show since it was announced. I like this promotion already, just in this article, where it has stuck to the show itself and didn't venture off, at least not yet, into anything remotely controversial like what ended up happening with the promotion surrounding The Acolyte, which I've discussed at length on this show. As always, your comments, I welcome them. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
And this comes in the form of your emails and listener feedback. This week, I've got several that we'll share with you. First off, this one comes from an anonymous emailer who writes this, relating to last week's conversation with Zach from the Knights of Vader podcast. I know that their episode recapping The Acolyte just dropped today, so I would encourage you to go and check out the Knights of Vader pod always a fantastic listen with Zach, and really enjoyed his appearance on the show last week, and he'll be back on again real soon. Anonymous says this: I loved The Acolyte, even though I'm very conservative politically. I feel like I can't watch or listen to channels like The Critical Drinker or Star Wars Theory anymore. It's like they're looking for woke content and stuff to get outraged over. I want to stop here real quick. I don't want to turn this into politics at all. I've had my fair share of people who have been listening to My Nerd World, a Star Wars show, for years, and had no idea that I was a conservative news talk show host. I hope that wouldn't go and ruin the show for you if you have enjoyed it up until this point. I try to keep politics out of it. I do not care what yours are, and I hope that you don't care what mine are. If I were taking a stance politically on the show, I think that would be very different. However, this anonymous emailer, I just want to point something out, that remaining anonymous for clearly a specific reason, because leaving the comment didn't want to see a backlash of comments, and I understand how that happens. It really is truly unfortunate within the fandom that the commentary and the discourse does end up falling down on political lines, because it really isn't representative of even the majority, in my opinion, of how people feel. I think when it comes to Star Wars, I know that there are some things, yes, that do sort of fall into that category politically because of certain content, and I get all that. But there are plenty of individuals, and I know that because I have friends that enjoy these shows and enjoy The Acolyte. I did too. I had my problems with it, but it's a show that I will go back and watch numerous times, despite even some personal issues that I have. But this serves as a really good example of an individual who is conservative politically, but does enjoy The Acolyte. And like me as well, I get tired of hearing some of the criticism, especially falling along the woke lines. And I agree. There's a lot of people that are just looking for it and aren't willing to go and look past it for the sake of the quality entertainment that they could be enjoying. Getting back to their comment, all those channels want is clicks and attention. It's not because they're actually genuine with their criticism, and it brings down my enjoyment of Star Wars. While the casting in The Acolyte was diverse, I didn't find anything about the storyline itself woke at all. My husband seemed to enjoy The Acolyte right along with me until he watched The Critical Drinker, and then he started parroting what I thought was unjustified criticism. There are some aspects of The Acolyte I found cringy, like the Channing witches, but overall, I really enjoyed the ride, and I don't think the show deserved the level of hate that it received online. So, Anonymous really echoes a lot of the sentiments that I had. And I had a similar experience. I watched several of those Critical Drinker episodes relating to The Acolyte. They're very well done. And the Critical Drinker made some good points. That being said, you could do that with almost anything. Almost anything. We watched on Apple Plus, Presumed Innocent with Jake Gyllenhaal. Really enjoyed the series. Parts of it, much like so much other content, I enjoyed more than others. Certain aspects of things that they did, I didn't really care for. There was dream sequences that didn't really seem necessary, just to kind of drag out episodes and things like that. But at the end of the day, I really enjoyed the series. I ended up listening to a podcast that I called The Watch on the Ringer Network. And they ended up really getting into the episode and started tearing it apart and began exposing potential inconsistencies in the story that I hadn't thought of before. And it got me questioning the show. And I say that because this happens with so many shows. And it's almost like I can look past it a lot of times, but sometimes it does end up sort of affecting your view on it and kind of ruins it for you. You could take so much content, and even the most beloved Star Wars content, and apply so many of the way that modern Star Wars gets criticized, apply those same dynamics to and that same process to the other content, and you could tear it apart just as easily. I'll never forget reading a piece about Return of the Jedi years ago. This was pre-blogs on the internet. And it was just an article written on the internet. But before we got into X and might have even been pre-Facebook. But it basically did what we see today. It just ripped apart Return of the Jedi for a whole bunch of inconsistencies. So this has been going on for a long time. It's just a matter of whether or not you can look past those things. All right. I'm rambling. Let's go to SheVP. SheVP writes, what I'm finding hilarious about the reactions to The Acolyte are just that people are shocked at the things that Osha does. And I'm just thinking, hello, this is literally a story about someone turning to the dark side. Yes, it's dark side stuff. It's like when Jack Sparrow says, pirate! Just chuckling. Laugh out loud. A great discussion with Zach John. Thank you, SheVP, for the comment, as always. Darth Bay writes, John, the saber choreograph was done by Liu Jun Chang. It was fantastic. I loved the Force Fu. I hope we see more of that style on future Star Wars projects. And then lastly, GameStation 2690 says, I have to correct you on something you mentioned on the previous podcast. I think this is something that Zach brought up. The final shot in The Rise of Skywalker was not reused footage from Pisana. One of the movie's editors said this, that shot was a shot in the desert where they shot the sequence on Pisana, but it was shot for that shot. It was specifically for that, and then ILM created a lot of that shot. So that's a question for Roger Guyette and the artists at ILM, how they created it. I picked the shot of Rey, which I know was shot in the same desert. It wasn't already in the film. It was for that sequence. Basically, there are only so many ways one can stand in the desert. And also, the photo that I brought up that looked like it was an exact shot of Rey, Finn, and Poe at the end on the jungle planet of The Rise of Skywalker. I had mentioned the photo that looked like it was taken in the same desert, Rudy Mun, for the stand-in planet, the stand-in desert for Pisana. And I had somebody reach out to me and say that was actually a production photo that was put out on on Twitter at the time via J.J. Abrams promoting the movie. So, whereas I thought perhaps maybe they had changed up the story when I was discussing with Zach the lack of deleted scenes from The Rise of Skywalker, that photo that I referenced turned out to be actually a production, a behind-the-scenes photo when the shoot was wrapping up there on Pisana, where the actors all got together and hugged. They just happened to be hugging very similarly to the way they were at the end of The Rise of Skywalker. All right, listen, that's it, this week's show. Not a ton going on, but I wanted to definitely get to the Skeleton Crew info. And if anything, you want to reach out to me with your questions, witticisms, criticisms, comments, conjecture, email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. And this is the portion of the show where I will remind you that I know you love science fiction. If you like to read or listen to science fiction, I hope you will take a moment right now and head on over to Amazon.com and check out my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with sci-fi. I wrote it because of my love of Star Wars and science fiction and space opera growing up. I wanted to write a series that was essentially, if I wasn't going to the theater to see a Star Wars film, what movie would I want to go see? And it's EMBARK in book form. And it reads a lot like a movie. Again, written for adults, but age appropriate for 11 and up. I hope you'll go and pick up EMBARK Book 1 today. The entire 7-book series completes the story in ebook, Kindle Unlimited, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with science fiction. The description for Book 1 is as follows. With interstellar travel possible, pilots are the future. And since the passing of her aerospace engineer father, Keitha Morrow has relentlessly trained to be the best. But when an industrial accident sets off an apocalyptic chain of events, she'll need more than her skills to survive. Meanwhile, Taft Guardia picked the right day to upgrade his ship when Keitha arrived, needing his help investigating a cryptic message she suddenly received. As a tyrannical enemy emerges to exploit the disaster, Keitha and Taft discover what may be the only chance of ending the conflict. On the run across the galaxy, Taft gathers a ragtag squadron to join the fight, while Keitha must solve the mystery of what her father left behind if there is any hope of saving Earth's evacuees before it's too late. I hope you will check out this fast-paced and action-packed epic science fiction space opera series. If you like your sci-fi space opera to be filled with some romance, really cool technology and action, EMBARK is perfect for you. Head on over to Amazon.com and search for Jon, Jon Justice, and EMBARK. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. I hope wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, you're safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.